optimistically for my slide to come up. There we go. Right, now, the slides I've got here and the talk that I've prepared sort of canvasses widely through a bit of teamwork and communication and settles down on briefings and debriefings. But in the light of some of the discussion we've had, I just thought I'd start out with some general comments just to put it in context, and then I'll probably go slightly more quickly through some of the slides than I might have otherwise gone through. Mainly because Mike's given a great demonstration of the challenges and the solutions for the checklist and those basic components, and obviously signalled that the move for Waitemata and indeed for all of us will be through the paperless checklist and the appropriate way of assessing how well we're doing that, on to briefings and debriefings. And in my mind, they are quite different. We all do the checklist. It's a somewhat of a cross we have to bear. I don't think any of us sort of enjoy the checklist. We do it, though, because we know there's a small chance we might do something very bad for patients, and we want to avoid that. And so we do the sign-in, time-out, sign-out. So when we've had the same experience as Mike, we've left appendixes in the abdomen. One of our talks, we were in one of the other two centres, they described leaving, was it some fat in the abdomen? So, you know, all sorts of things that the one that always worries me, and it's happened again at Auckland, is losing a specimen. I mean, you know, that's the ultimate thing. So we do the time-in, sign-out stuff for safety for the patients. Doesn't make our day any better. It's a little bit of a, you know, it's a few seconds, 30 seconds, a minute here or there, but we do it because once we get past the cognitive dissonance, we know that it actually does make a difference in terms of mortality and complication, and we should do it. Briefings and debriefings are quite different. They actually are great for us because our day goes better. All of the little things that happen that frustrate us during the course of an operating list actually have been preempted, and the team works better, the day finishes better. Maybe that last case that otherwise may have been cancelled because we're trying to start it after 3 o'clock, actually we're not starting it after 3 o'clock and we can do it. All of the things happen. It's much more something that makes us feel good. So what, you know, that's not patient focused. Why should we be doing that? Well, if the team's feeling good, there's an overarching quality, it helps the team perform better, and all of the other things that result in a quality outcome. I'm often asked, I mean, and in briefings and debriefings, the issue is the same as for the checklist. Often it's the surgeons, and I'll get you to do some paperwork as well and help me identify the barriers and the solutions for both briefings and debriefings. But it's often the surgeons that you'll find that present the greatest challenges for this. And that, to me, I mean, I'm surprised and I'm not surprised. Surgeons, Mike raised one of the things that surgeons do. He had it at the bottom of his list, but I think that is actually the thing we do most. We all have PhDs in passive aggressiveness. Absolutely. I can't be bothered engaging with you. I'm not going to write a big long email to Mike saying, well, I think my view's right. I'm just going to take the over my dead body approach. And we do this quite regularly. So I'm just going to carry on doing what I've always done. We are slow to change people generally. I'm sure there's a few innovators and people that are fast to move, but most of us are very slow. This is the way I've trained. This is the way I do things. I am not changing. And when you come along and say, I'd like you to do something different that is not, that I don't immediately buy into, my approach is going to be, I'm pretend that doesn't happen. I'm going to go in my passive aggressive mode. I'm not going to go at it. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm going to simply carry on doing what I'm doing and challenge you. You know, you can't make me change. I'm just going to carry on doing what I'm doing. So when it comes to briefings and debriefings, surgeons, and I think Mike and Cliff both raised this, the idea that I expect you to know all the things that I'm thinking of, and yet being surprised when it doesn't happen. Just give you two simple examples. So I'm operating today and I'm doing a carotid endarterectomy on a patient that's on aspirin and clopidogrel, because we generally don't stop those medications in place in carotid endarterectomy. You could bet that there'll be some bleeding. I know that this will bleed a bit more than a patient who's not on aspirin or clopidogrel. And probably, in order to speed up the operation, I'll probably use some adjuvant to stop bleeding after I've stitched the patch in. Commonly, some prothrombin soaked on some gel foam, or maybe some flow seal. So if I don't have a briefing, I'm hoping that somebody's read my mind. Why they would, I don't know. They probably wouldn't know the patient, and they will have got these products ready. But in a briefing, and so when it comes along and I say, can I have some prothrombin, please, and some gel foam? Yes, certainly, Dr. Sybil. They'll wander out, and another 5 minutes, and then another 5 minutes to mix it up, and 10 minutes has happened, and that 10 minutes is 10 minutes of the day. Or I can have some flow seal. Yeah, sure, I'll just go and get it from... Whereas if we've had the briefing and we've talked about that, then that cuts all of that out of the space, and suddenly my day's better. And the nurse who's already got it there, she feels very proactive, because otherwise, why didn't I know? Should I have known that? Does he feel mad with me? Does he think I don't know what I should be doing? All of those things. And the briefing also allows the communication process to work so much better. The number of times I've been asked in a briefing, because as Mike knows, I use this tool for my rule is you can use an iron intern in any operation. But anyway, doing a case and maybe a femoral end artery, a crossover, femoral crossover graft where you're operating on both groins. Depends how fat the patient is, but if the patient's in any way fat, it's helpful to have two retractors there. The question will be asked, are you going to use the iron intern? Do you want the double-bladed iron intern for that? Yes, please. And they get it, and it's available immediately, versus not asking that question and then expecting it to somehow come out of the blue. So the idea that surgeons wouldn't engage in a briefing when it's actually for them, and it's for the anaesthetist, and it's for the nursing team, and it's for the anaesthetic techs, is actually something that I hope we'll be able to get rid of any cognitive dissonance. But it will be there, because we don't like change, and until we think, until we can perceive that there is a benefit for us, we're probably not going to change. So, what is a briefing? It's a simple way for the team to share information, talk about actual safety issues and procedures, and in an environment, and in my experience, this is way more functional and less structured than the timeout, for example. This is actually more of a discussion, even though we run it, through with a guideline. It's more of a discussion, and people engage more. The debriefing has some of the timing challenges, which will help me identify, and other challenges at the end of the list to identify the time when it should be done. But it's basically what went well, what can we improve, and how are we going to improve it? What needs to be done to improve that? We know that communication makes a difference. A lot of OR communications fail. Example, doing a FemPop bypass, decide I'll do a completion angiogram, say generally to no one in particular, could somebody get the radiographer please? Not getting a response. Then 10 minutes later, when I've finished the anastomosis, okay, well, where's the radiographer? I don't see II here. Nobody called them, as opposed to good closed-loop communication, looking at the board, reminding myself who the circulating nurse is. Mary, could we call radiography, please? Yes, I'll go and call radiography now. Is that what you want? Do you want them right now? Yes, please. Thank you. Closed-loop communication, much more effective, and does not cause visible effects such as tension, inefficiency, waste of resources, delay, etc., etc. How do we deal with it in the military? Well, with a briefing. How do we deal with it in sports teams? Surgeons love being in charge. How often have you heard whatever the sports team, be it I can't use the Blues example. Oh, sorry. Another Super 15 team, or the All Blacks, the coach or the captain saying, we had a good game plan and we stuck to it and we won. Of course they have a game plan. They have a briefing. They have an understanding. What do the military do? Well, you can't ever not have even the simplest thing. There's always the situation, the mission, the enemy, whoever they are, etc., etc. There's always a briefing. So even situations which are highly hierarchical, way more structured than our teamwork in surgery, they have a briefing. And again, when the team loses, the coach comes out and says, well, the team didn't stick to the game plan and that's why we lost. We didn't actually do what we said we were going to do. So briefings are an important part, and they're an important part of the overall context of good teamwork and communication. And there are 5 main components to that. I won't go through them, but leadership's one. Mutual performance monitoring and backup behaviour sort of go together. They are watching out for the other person, so making sure that the overall team functions all right. Adaptability, we need to be flexible, and I think we are actually one of the things we're quite good at, because the operating room environment changes quite frequently. And team orientation's about what is the goal today, not what my goal is. My goal is to get out of here by 3:30 so that I can go and do something else or whatever. But what is the team goal? The team goal is to provide safe surgery for all the patients that we expect. And the team orientation is more important than the individual's orientation on that day. And the result of having good teamwork and communication is that we end up in a shared mental model. Another really good way to get a shared mental model is to have a briefing. So everyone knows that you'll take about half an hour on the first case and 2 hours on the second case, and there'll be a bit of a delay for anaesthesia on the third case, and all the other things that are going on. There's an example in the little Far Side cartoon where obviously the king and the moat builder didn't have the same mental model. Yeah, there's a big ditch going around, it's going to be filled with water. Just the relationship to the castle wall didn't seem to be quite the same. And mutual trust. This is not to say that people are untrustworthy. It's hard for me to trust you if I actually don't know what you are. So in the briefing, I mean, I don't operate that much anymore, so it is sometimes a surprise to me who's actually in the team, and I may or may not know the anaesthetist, but there'll be a range of nurses. 1 or 2 I might know, the others I don't. So when one says, I'm Mary, I usually work in urology, but I'm just in here. So you actually haven't done any vascular surgery? No, I haven't. That means I now can trust her to perform in a way for somebody who is unfamiliar with vascular surgery, as opposed to not being sure and therefore not trusting the person because I don't know what they're capable of. Just a couple of slides from a paper from Laurelie Lingard to show the effect of a team briefing in an environment where they were looking at communication failures. And this was a briefing structured by a 1-page checklist of prompts, which is what we in the Commission and what I do personally. If you like, don't really like using the word checklist, because the moment I use that I get in my mind that there's a list and there are checks, which of course it's a sort of a checklist, but it's more of a guideline. But this is what they used, and they found that most of the time there was actually some value in the communications that they had in the briefing, and even half of the communication events had a direct impact on patient care. And the end result was that before they did a briefing, there were these communication failures. They were observationally assessing them. So it wasn't, 3 or 4 communication failures was not unusual. And from that previous work, we know that 35% of communication failures are associated with visible effects such as tension, procedural error, etc. So once you're getting beyond 3 or 4 communication failures, you could expect that there would be visible effects in terms of the procedure that you're doing. After the briefing, it was unusual to get more than 3 communication failures, and 0 is obviously the ideal result, but 1 or 2 is unlikely to be associated with a procedural consequence. And just put in a tabular form, before the intervention there were 340 communication failures. About half or nearly half of those had a visible consequence, and after that the number dropped to a third. So it made a difference. If you comes back to the same thing, if we communicate well, it will have less effect on the outcome. So what are the barriers? And this is meant to be a little bit of a cue to you, some of the things that you might want to think about, which are the barriers to briefings. I've got some of the sheets that we had in Wellington yesterday, some of the things that people wrote down here with the barriers to briefings. Long list, short days, late arrivals, multidisciplinary meeting before lists, people who don't buy in, ego, power, so focused on their specific tasks. It adds time, some of the same argument, even though the evidence is overwhelming that it actually reduces the time of the list. Some of the arguments are, well, it takes, and again, Mike's example's absolutely true. People confabulate how long these things take. A briefing takes between 3 minutes and 5 minutes max. Yes, You do have to be all in one place. You might have to go to the operating room when you weren't otherwise, but it doesn't take 20 minutes. It doesn't take half an hour. And then I've asked them, and I'll ask you to help me solve, what are the solutions to that? And this is the command. I'm not sure this would help the cognitive dissonance, but the first solution that this team came up with: turn up on time. Education on the process, that obviously appeals to creating the evidence-based background for it. A big workshop, data, consequences. That I can see the stick coming out here, and Clifford told me that they obviously, it's business as usual to do a briefing, and they would not be able to start an operation unless they'd done the briefing in his hospital in Los Angeles. Now, we do that, have approached pretty much with a timeout, but we haven't got the big stick out for briefings, and I'm certainly not proposing we do. I don't think that's necessarily the right way to go. But maybe at some future time, when it is business as usual will be you'll do the briefing before you start the list. And if you didn't do a briefing, well, we'd wait until everyone got there to do the briefing before the list would start. Maybe, but that's up to an organisation. Just an example, I was watching this on one of the Gallipoli programs that was on. This is a classic non-briefing military scenario. This is more an Australian campaign, part of the campaign, and I didn't know a lot about it from a New Zealand perspective, but there was a big assault on this place called the Neck, and it was a very complex plan. Involved the New Zealanders. We were meant to have taken Chunuk Bair and be coming down. The British were going to land 35,000 light horse in some area, and the Australians were going to assault across this pack of open ground. And it was the time, and there was going to be a barrage, and that was going to stop at a certain time. And so the general briefed all of his, major unit commanders and told them about this plan, and they, on the TV program, and I think it's correct, they were all very concerned, very complex plan, and they expressed their view: you haven't given us much time, we're going now to have to brief our men, and we really not got much time to do that. And the general said, no briefing, it'll all be fine. It's a very complex plan, and I just confuse them if you brief them, just go ahead and do whatever. So what happened? Well, the barrage stopped a little bit early, but nobody knew what time it was meant to stop, and so they didn't know whether to advance straight away or not. The New Zealanders didn't quite take Chunuk Bair exactly as quickly as was thought, and so they weren't coming down from the other way. The British, at least as a TV program portrayed, thought it was a bit dangerous to land all their light horse men, so they didn't land them at all. And the end result was the Australians just marched out at the due time and got slaughtered, and because nobody knew how it was all meant to get, that nobody had any idea of how the old plan was meant to go together. Had they, I don't know, in the structured military environment of World War I would have made a difference, but certainly in our operating rooms, if everyone knows the overall plan, you can adapt your behaviour individually to meet the overall plan rather than be treated on a need-to-know basis. Teamwork and communication is not helped by being regarded as a member of the team that I will tell you everything that you need to do. You don't do anything, I'll tell you. That creates a sort of mentality which is not inclusive. This means, yeah, okay, I'm turned here. When do I go off? Well, it's morning teas pretty soon. That's good. But I can't engage with the team if I'm not briefed in. What about debriefing? Well, what are some of the things that affect debriefing? Barriers to debriefing. Logistics, getting everyone back in the room. Well, does everyone need to get back in the room, or should we do it before everyone leaves the room? Fatigue. We're all tired. Overtime, some staff already left for the day. Again, another logistic thing. Communication, positivity. Solutions. Do the debrief straight after this sign out. That's what somebody says here. So I'll be asking for your input on that to see if you can help us do this. Just to follow up with on Mike's, this is some results from Auckland in terms of using, I know, digressing slightly here, but the paperless checklist. There's been 3 studies largely done by Simon Mitchell and the team at 3 different time periods for different reasons. And this looks at the degree to which there was 2-team engagement using the WHO-BARS assessment tool, which is that 1 to 7 Likert scale. And at the 7 end of the scale, that's full engagement. Everyone stops, like Mike's descriptions of this. Everyone stops, pays attention, doesn't do anything else, not on the cell phone, not fiddling around with the drapes, asking for another towel clip and getting ready to make the first incision, none of those sorts of things. Were they engaged? Back in and because the surgeons are not usually at the sign-in, that's why the goal is 2-team engagement there, but 3-team engagement for the other 2. A little bit of fatigue between 11 and 13, so more people engaged in 11 than 13, both in the sign-out and the time-out. And then this is with the paperless checklist. And I think the result that I want to flag here in particular, sign-out is still a challenge, and we've got to do some work on that. But look at this. Before the paperless checklist, the actual engagement measured by observing exactly in the method that Mike described, observing the team doing the checklist with the piece of paper, was less than 20%. I can see all the reasons. As a surgeon, you're sitting there, you've got the patient all prepared, somebody's reading the checklist, you're nodding away and thinking, oh, look, I can just make this a bit better, and I'm just going to shift the drapes and ask for a towel clip, and I want to shift the diathermy over to here, all those sort of things. So that is not engaged. After we get the surgeons doing the checklist, using the paperless checklist, huge change, absolutely huge change in engagement. I think coming back to the debriefing, if we don't have a debriefing and we don't identify where things are not going right, we'll just keep doing the same things over and over again. And briefing and debriefing both helped by having a guide, and I won't dwell on this because Gabrielle's going to show the latest version with the latest colours. Oh, rest assured, they won't be sky blue. We had a bit of feedback about this. I personally didn't think this was a great colour for the briefing, but you won't be bound to. The commission will just produce some vanilla versions of this, and you can make them whatever corporate colours you like and whatever hospital you like. But basically, some of the key elements is that it's a cooperative environment, shared goals, open communication. We use a guide. The debriefing, there's all present, constructive feedback, areas for improvement, write out what happened, why, and suggestions for improvement. Oh, they did that the other day too. I don't know why I did that, but anyway. So what are the barriers, and have you experienced them, and what can you do to help me? Because I use these to try and identify what it is that people find a problem, a perceived problem or an actual problem if you're doing it, and how might you resolve that, and similarly for the debriefings.